It is calling out to you. That kind of power is calling out. So we have the old saying, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Think about that ring of invisibility. Now, in our tale, it's not a ring. It's not nearly as convenient as a ring. But clearly Wells was thinking about ideas like this as he wrote the story, and it's something you'll want to keep in mind as you look at it and read the study guide. Here are the major characters of the Invisible Man story, just to get you caught up on that. Here's a fellow online who was asked to create the ring of Gaijis for a customer. So he made a ring like this. It looks suitably old and kind of Near Eastern, and it's got the little gem on it that presumably turns a bit. I hope it doesn't actually work. It's silver instead of gold. It's actually white gold. So he's keeping to the original description. It's a gold ring in the Ring of Gaijis, and of course in Lord of the Rings. So we have Griffin, the Invisible Man himself. Kemp, a fellow scientist that after about halfway through the work, Griffin goes and speaks to. We have Mr. and Mrs. Hall, the innkeepers at the place where Griffin comes to stay. Marvel, Mr. Marvel, who is a tramp, a hobo, just living out in the countryside. And Colonel Adai and Jaffers, the policeman from the two towns where the action goes back and forth. So here's a set of characters in the piece, and gee, imagine that. How do you know? Griffin, of course, is the protagonist. Kemp, the scientist who decides to try and turn him in, is actually the antagonist. So we have a kind of reversal here, right? Here's the main character. I guess you could flip them around, but here's the guy you see at the beginning and you see all the way through. So in terms of being the main character, he's the protag. But he's not sympathetic, as you'll see. Griffin is not a nice guy. Kemp, the guy he goes and explains things to, the scientist who can understand what he says, doesn't like it and tries to turn him in. So he's the guy you end up rooting for, even though he's the antagonist. Could that happen in your stories? I suppose that's true. Here are the Halls and Mr. Marvel. They have the tendency to bring people together. Obviously, the Halls keep an inn, and everyone gathers in the tavern there, and the Invisible Man has to deal with them. And the tramp, you'll see the part he has to play in bringing people together. And, of course, the authority figures, the police chief and the constable who organize the searches for the Invisible Man towards the end when he goes on his rampage and investigate his early shenanigans as well. So a little bit of background on the Invisible Man, the story, the science fiction genre that guys like H.G. Wells started, and some of the themes that I want you to think about as you're reading the book. I think you'll enjoy it. It's a really interesting book. I know you're all wondering whether I blogged about this, and of course I did. So if you wanted to go to the Independent Bookworm, you could look for Classics You've Never Read. It's the one subtitled So Wrong They're Right, and maybe next week I'll get a chance to talk a little more about that. But today I'd want to keep it focused on these characters here so that we can have a nice bridge over to your writing exercise. I'm not going to give you any straight up homework, but I'm going to urge you to think about this while you're reading Invisible Man and starting on the vocabulary and the study guide questions. Remember that we have this writing exercise. We're going to come back to this time and again. You have at this point a character, a role, a genre, and a venue. Here's two of the more popular venues, the remote mansion and the tavern. Who knows what they'll actually look like, but you have a character and a role in a certain genre and a venue, and that means, of course, also that you have a team. Those things you can't really change at all. Here are some things you might have by now. Some notes on your appearance. I see what you wrote last week. You might wish to change them. Your age, a name for your character, the strengths and weaknesses and the quirks. All of that is a little bit plastic at this point. I'd like you to have jotted something down there. Most of you have. If you haven't, I really need you to take a look at all of those categories and put something down. And if you want to change it, we have, for example, in one of the genres, we have a facilitator who chose age 3, which is kind of interesting, actually. She indicated that she might want to change that, but, you know, I think a 3-year-old can bring people together just as well as anybody else. I think we have somebody else who is 4,500 years old, and okay. But, you know, think these things over. Think about the golden rule here. Are you making it easy for your teammates to write about you? Because you'd like them, I'm sure, to make it easy for you to write about them. You want to include these people in your story when you write it, so try to get together and work something out. Hopefully next week we can do that. You should be aiming, when I put you together in teams, I was hoping to do it today, but hopefully next week you do a little more thinking about it and get ahead of the game. Be able to sit together with your team and tell them something about yourself. Try to make a consistent character, the kinds of things they want, the kind of things that they're going to do. Explore these quirks, these strengths and weaknesses, and make sure they understand the appearance so they can describe you in stories as well. The appearance is actually not to be underestimated as an important feature of the character. And here's the one I really want you to think about. The goal for your character. You'll have done a good job if you can go down to that part of the sheet and write one sentence on what the character's goal is. What is it? What is the kind of thing that your character always wants? And again, think series. Think about an ongoing series of stories. The protagonist will serve the function of saving the day, I suppose, in some of these genres. But is that the goal? Is that what the character really wants, right? Sometimes, like in a superhero story, the protagonist will save the day, but what he really wants is to be accepted. He really wants, some more friends. He's lonely or something like that, right? So think about the kind of thing that might always be out there for your character that they might not get at the end of one story, that they might never get to at the end of their whole lives. Something that they're constantly striving for. And the more they are striving for it, all things being equal, the better it'll be. Because that means that there's struggle, there's conflict, and conflict is good to write about. People like to read about conflict. It's more exciting, obviously, than things just kind of floating along beautifully. And it also gives them a way to explore the questions that might interest them, right? In The Invisible Man, there's conflict. In the Hobbit and in Scarlet Pimpernel, there's conflict. These characters have things they want, but they can't, right? Percy's hopelessly in love with his wife, but he doesn't feel he can afford to tell her anything, right? Because he has to suspect that she is working with the enemy, and he feels terrible. And you know what? She is actually working with the enemy to an extent, but she's not willing to work with the enemy. If only they had talked before, right? That's the kind of thing that gets the reader hooked. That's what gets them shouting at the book while they're reading. And that's the kind of thing you want to aim for. So these goals are very important to that. And I want you to be able to talk about your character's goal next week at the latest when we come to class. And praise God, please let there be no snow in a week, because we really have to get down to this before it just calcifies. You want to have your goal set and be able to kick it out to the other team members so that you can begin to understand how those goals all relate to each other. What does the protagonist want? Does the antagonist just want the opposite of that? That happens a lot. Maybe the antagonist wants a totally different thing. That these are the kind of things you want to try and work out, because they will help you to create interesting story dynamics, and then you can all go off and write a tale on your own later in the year. So I want you to have high ambitions for your character. Think about the goal of your character this upcoming week, and then hopefully in class a week from today we can hit the ground running. Wrap up any questions you might have on Invisible Man. I hope you will have read at least part of it. Some of you seem to be delaying until the last minute to read these books. I can't tell you how to go about your homework. But if you're not reading the book, I certainly want you to work on your character. I certainly want that. And think particularly about the goal for your character. I can see that I'm having a little bit of focus trouble. I hope that wasn't the case throughout most of our presentation. I was only checking the screen for timing. I'll take a look at that before I boot it up to the web. But I'm assuming this one goes through. Have a great snow day. I hate snow. I moved south so I can get away from snow. Please leave me alone. It's been my pleasure to be your Invisible Man today. And I'll see you guys in a week. Good luck.